Hi students, this is A. Mandri Kumar Rajesh. In this video, we are going to discuss a topic called development of male gametophyte. The microspores or the pollen grains are considered as the first cell of male gametophyte. The development of male gametophyte takes place while they are in microsporangium or pollen sac. So the germination of the male gametophyte takes place even in microsporangium itself. That is why that type of germination is called as precoccious germination. Precoccious germination. Microspore அல்லது pollen grain நம்ம என்ன சொல்றோம் first cell of the male gametophyte னு சொல்றோம். அதோட development எங்க நடக்குது? In the microsporangium or pollen sac. அப்போ அந்த மைக்ரோஸ்போராஞ்சியத்துக்குள்ளேயே டெவலப்மெண்ட் நடக்கிறதுனால மேல் கேமிட்டோஃபைட்டோட டெவலப்மெண்ட் நடக்கிறதுனால அந்த ஜெர்மினேஷன் நம்ம என்ன சொல்றோம் ப்ரீகாக்சியஸ் ஜெர்மினேஷன் அப்படின்ட்டு சொல்றோம் சரிங்களா wherein the central large vacuole is formed and that process is called as vacuolation. So in the pollen grain a large central vacuole is formed. So this is a structure of pollen grain. The outer layer is called exine, the inner layer is called intine, and this is the nucleus of the pollen grain. So the germination initiated. So vacuole is a large central vacuole is formed. A large central vacuole is formed. So due to the formation of a large central vacuole, the nucleus of the pollen grain push towards the periphery. சரிங்களா large vacuole form ஆன உடனே the nucleus of the pollen grain push towards the periphery. சரிங்களா அந்த ப்ராசஸ் தான் அந்த வேக்குவல் ஃபார்ம் ஆகிற ப்ராசஸ் தான் நம்ம சொல்றோம் வேக்குவலேஷன் சொல்றோம் நியூக்ளியஸ் எங்க பார்த்து வந்துருச்சு பெரிஃபெரியை பார்த்து வந்துருச்சு தென் திஸ் நியூக்ளியஸ் undergoes mitotic division இந்த நியூக்ளியஸ் எந்த டிவிஷனுக்குள்ள என்டர் ஆகுது மைட்டாட்டிக் டிவிஷனுக்குள்ள என்டர் ஆகுது and it becomes two unequal cell results in the formation of two unequal cells சரிங்களா அப்போ என்ன நடக்குது இந்த நியூக்ளியஸ் ரெண்டு செல்லா டிவைட் ஆகுது two unequal cells டிவைட் ஆகுது சரிங்களா the large cell is known as vegetative cell. The large cell is known as vegetative cell. The smaller cell is known as generative cell. So two unequal cells are form ஆகுதுன்னு சொன்னோம்னா அதுல larger cell நம்ம என்னன்னு சொல்றோம் vegetative cell. The larger cell is called as vegetative cell. The smaller cell is called as generative cell. Then I am going to tell about the generative cell. In early stage, the generative cells are hemispherical in shape. And they remain attached to the wall. They remain attached to the pollen wall. சரிங்களா early stageல the generative cell வந்து எதுல attached ஆயிருக்கு pollen wallல attached ஆயிருக்கு and they are hemispherical in shape. After some time it becomes spherical in shape. And detached from the pollen wall அதுக்கப்புறம் என்ன நடக்குது அந்த generative cell spherical shape மாறிடுது and they detached from the pollen wall. சரிங்களா? Then I am going to tell about the vegetative cell. அப்ப larger cell தான் நம்ம என்னன்னு சொல்றோம்? Vegetative cell னு சொல்றோம். It can store fat and starch. It can store fat and starch as reserve food material. Then the vacuoles get disappear from the vegetative cells. So vacuole என்ன ஆகுது? Disappear ஆகுது. எதுல இருந்து? Vegetative cell இருந்து. So vacuoles get disappear ஆயிடுச்சு. Then it contains the cell organelles like plastids, mitochondria, ribosomes, அதுக்கப்புறம் RNA. It contains RNA content. RNA. So if RNA is present, they are able to produce more amount of proteins. அதால என்ன ப்ரொடியூஸ் பண்ண முடியும்? புரோட்டீனை ப்ரொடியூஸ் பண்ண முடியும். And it contains less amount of DNA content. So the vegetative cell less amount of DNA content is present. Less amount of DNA content is present. சரிங்களா? While in the case of the generative cell, it contains highly reduced cytoplasm. The generative cell cytoplasm is highly reduced. Cytoplasm is highly reduced. And they looks like hyaline. They looks like hyaline. Hyaline means a translucent substance. A translucent substance. It can allow light, but it is not transparent. சரிங்களா? Translucent இருக்கும். Then it contains cell organelles like mitochondria, ribosomes, microtubules, and dictyosomes. சரிங்களா? Then it lacks RNA and reserve food material. So generative cell என்ன இருக்காது? RNA content இருக்காது, reserve food material இருக்காது. And it contains high amount of DNA content. சரிங்களா? It contains large amount of DNA content. சரிங்களா? So this is the major difference between vegetative cell and the generative cell. Then the pollen grains are set from the anther usually in two cell stage. The pollen grain வந்து antherல இருந்து எப்போ செட் ஆகும் பாத்தீங்கன்னா they are in the two cell stage. That means vegetative cell generative cell இருக்கும்போது anther வந்து என்ன ஆகும்? pollen grain வந்து என்ன ஆகும்? antherல இருந்து ரிலீஸ் ஆகும். சரிங்களா? The further development of pollen grain takes place when it reaches the stigma. அதோட pollen grainோட அடுத்த டெவலப்மெண்ட் எங்க நடக்கும் அப்படின்னு பாத்தீங்கன்னா further development எங்க நடக்கும்னு பாத்தீங்கன்னா when it reaches the stigma. சரிங்களா? அப்ப அத பத்தி நம்ம பார்ப்போம். Let me teach you the further development of male gametophyte when the pollen grain reaches the stigma. சரிங்களா? இப்ப நம்ம என்ன பார்க்க போறோம்னா the male gametophyte further development. எப்போ அந்த further development நடக்கும்? When the pollen grain reaches the stigma. சரிங்களா? Now it reaches the pollen grain reaches the stigma. The intestine of the pollen grain protrudes through one germ pore and produces a delicate structure called pollen tube. Intestine of the pollen grain protrudes through one germ pore, and it forms a delicate tubular structure called pollen tube. It was first discovered by the scientist Hamishi in 1823 in the plant Portulaca. Portulaca pollen. The pollen tube first discovered பண்ணது யாரு? Hamishi in 1823. எதுல? In Portulaca pollen. So a delicate tubular structure called pollen tube. The intestine of the pollen grain protrudes through one germ pore, and it forms a delicate structure called pollen tube, and it was first discovered by Hamishi in 1823 in Portulaca pollen. Then the pollen tube continues its growth through the stem, and there are two types of pollen grains. They are monosiphonous and polysiphonous pollen grain. Monosiphonous pollen grain means the pollen grains are able to produce only one pollen tube. In majority of the angiosperm, the pollen grains are able to produce one pollen tube. In some cases, the pollen grains are able to produce one to more pollen tube, and that type of pollen grains are polysiphonous pollen grains. சரிங்களா? ஒன்றுல இருந்து ஒரு 3 pollen tubes அதால என்ன பண்ண முடியும்? Produce பண்ண முடியும். That is why it is called as polysiphonous. Example, malva. In malva, the pollen grains are able to produce more than one pollen tube. Example, malva. சரிங்களா? In some cases, pollen tubes are branched pollen tubes. So in some cases, branched pollen tubes are seen. Example, cucurbita. சரிங்களா? Then the vegetative cell and the generative cells are migrate towards the pollen tube. So this is the two cells which are present inside the pollen tube. சரிங்களா? இதுதான் generative cell, இது என்னது? Vegetative cells. It migrates towards the pollen tube. So this structure is called this pollen tube. எது வழியா வந்துச்சு? Through the germ pore. சரிங்களா? The intestine protrudes through the germ pore, and it produces a delicate tubular structure called pollen tube. Then the vegetative cell and the generative cells are migrate towards the pollen tube. Okay, then a callus plug is formed at regular intervals. சரிங்களா? ஸோ இதில் வந்து பார்த்தீங்கன்னா callus intervals இருக்கும். அப்படின்னு பார்த்தீங்கன்னா callus plugs இருக்கும். சரிங்களா? at regular intervals. Then the vegetative cell only moves towards the pollen tube. The vegetative cell only moves first towards the pollen tube, and it acts as tube nucleus. இந்த vegetative cell தான் pollen tube பார்த்து first என்ன ஆகி வரும்? மூவ் ஆகி வரும். And it acts as tube nucleus. So this tube nucleus plays an important role in directing the growth of pollen tube. The tube nucleus oda function enna? It only directs the growth of pollen tube. Tube nucleus only direct the growth of the pollen tube. சரிங்களா? Then this cell is the generative cell. இதை நம்ம என்ன சொல்றோம்? generative cell னு சொல்றோம். This generative cells undergoes mitotic division and it forms two male nucleus. It forms two male nucleus. இந்த generative cell வந்து என்ன ஆகுது? It undergoes generative cells undergoes mitotic cell division and it produces two male gamete. சரிங்களா? Male nucleus. Male nucleus. They are haploid in nature. They are haploid in nature. The generative cell undergoes mitotic cell division and produces two male nucleus. They are called as male gametes. So the generation of or the production of the male nucleus is called as spermatogenesis. The generation of male nucleus or the sperm is called this. That process is called this spermatogenesis. சரிங்களா? அப்ப அந்த ஜெனரேட்டிவ் செல் கடைசி என்ன ப்ரொடியூஸ் பண்ணிருச்சு? மேல் நியூக்ளியஸை ப்ரொடியூஸ் பண்ணிருச்சு. சரிங்களா? One male nucleus fuses with, when it enters into the embryo sac, the pollen tube reaches the embryo sac and it releases the male nucleus. சரிங்களா? ரெண்டு male nucleus ரிலீஸ் பண்ணும். One male nucleus fuses with the female nucleus and another male nucleus fuses with the central polar nuclei. Male and female nucleus fuse to form a zygote and it becomes embryo. Then the another male nucleus fuses with central polar nuclei, results in the formation of endosperm. சரிங்களா? இதுதான் double fertilization நம்ம சொல்லுவோம். So that's all about today's video. If you have any doubt, please let me know. Thank you very much for watching this video. Thank you.